Welcome back to another reaction video. Well, AI is taking the world by storm, and there are a lot of questions that are being raised about how it should be used, about what's appropriate, and there are a lot of people who have very strong opinions on this, and I know that because I've dabbled with it myself a little bit, just in kind of a fun way, by like making songs about history and doing little images, and I even ran a couple of days ago, I uploaded an ad that I ran that was advertising Ohio as the best state for historical figures in American history. And it was meant to be lighthearted and fun, but some people got really upset about it because they hate how AI is being used. And so I thought we would dive into this topic a little bit today by taking a look at what is clearly an AI historical video. And this one caught my attention because it got recommended to me. I'm not sure why. It's a video that came out about a week ago. It's only got 250 views, but it was the headline and the image that caught my attention. The headline was "Role of Brigadier General Joshua Chamberlain at Gettysburg" by this channel called The World Revolution. And I noticed two things right away. Number one, Joshua Chamberlain wasn't a brigadier general at the Battle of Gettysburg. It was his first job as colonel of the 20th Maine. He had been promoted. In fact, the movie Gettysburg does a great job of showing the timing of this, because at the beginning of the movie Gettysburg, as they're marching toward Gettysburg, Chamberlain still got his lieutenant colonel straps on. But by the time of the day of the battle, he's now a colonel, and he's got the full bird there. But then the other thing that caught my attention was that the AI image that was in the thumbnail was not of Chamberlain. And so this led me to think, I wonder how much then the video itself gets wrong. So that since this is talking about Chamberlain at Gettysburg, this is a topic I know really well, so I feel pretty confident in being able to nitpick this thing. And I do this because I want to show you the dangers of these faceless AI channels, where people can basically type in a prompt into an AI generator like InVideo or something and have it generate an entire video about a topic without doing any research, without doing any kind of fact checking, without even having to do any work. And in a matter of minutes, you could generate a 25-minute video without having to write a script, do any research, look up any of the images. It'll do all of it for you. And the danger, of course, in that is that AI is not at the place yet where it always gets the information right. And there are often some very crucial mistakes being made. So I want to go through this video today, and I know some of you are like, I'm not even going to watch it because it's AI slop. Well, that's fine. I understand that. But bear with me, because this is a chance for us to talk about why it's dangerous to watch these AI videos. Let's dive in.
Blood stained the trampled grass of Little Round Top as Lieutenant Colonel Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain raised his saber.
Okay, so let's stop right there. First of all, we've got an image here that is clearly not historically accurate as far as what you would see from Civil War soldiers. The uniforms are all wrong. It's definitely AI generated. We're seeing Chamberlain in the uniform of a brigadier general, which he was made a brigadier general at Petersburg in 1864 by Grant, when it seemed pretty apparent that Chamberlain was on his deathbed from wounds received at Petersburg. He actually survived, but he's a brigadier general not for another year. This is also not Little Round Top, and Chamberlain was not a lieutenant colonel at Little Round Top. So we're calling him a lieutenant colonel, we're showing him as a brigadier general, and they're both wrong. He was a colonel at Little Round Top.
Signaling his men forward in a desperate bayonet charge. With ammunition exhausted and his left flank threatening to collapse, the former professor of rhetoric had made a decision that would change the course of American history.
I wouldn't go that far, though some people will say that it would, save the battle.
In that moment on July 2nd, 1863, the fate of the Union Army's vulnerable left flank, and perhaps the nation itself, rested in the hands of a scholarly man who had never intended to become a soldier.
It said, it called him a scoundrelly man. He was not a scoundrelly man. He was a very upright man.
Before the thunders...
And he did intend to become a soldier. He actually looked into being a soldier when he was younger, before then thinking about going into ministry or maybe a missionary, because he had a long line of military history in his family, and he actually considered a military career. But then by the time he goes into the Civil War, he's very much intending to be a soldier.
Guns of Gettysburg called him to greatness. Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain had walked the quiet halls of Bowdoin College in Maine. At 34...
Yeah, see, the AI can't pronounce things like Bowdoin College. It's spelled like Bowdoin, but it's Bowdoin.
The professor of rhetoric had exchanged his academic robes for a Union uniform, believing that preserving the nation demanded more than eloquent lectures on morality.
He did believe
it
that.
required action. Despite lacking formal military training,
That
Chamberlain's
is not Chamberlain. Oh, these AI images kill me.
leadership abilities and quick intellect earned him command of the 20th Maine Infantry Regiment.
Maine has an E in it. I'm going to nitpick every little bit of this because I want you to see how much these AI videos get wrong.
Chamberlain's transition from professor to soldier represents one of the most remarkable character transformations in American military history.
So he actually is given, he's offered command of his own regiment by the governor of Maine. And Chamberlain, recognizing his own lack of knowledge in that department when a lot of other guys would have been like, yeah, because they would have taken it. He said, I think I need to learn the business first. And so he accepts a commission as a lieutenant colonel, knowing then that he can learn under a colonel like Adelbert Ames, who was a pretty young guy himself and ends up becoming a high-ranking politician and the last Union general officer to die when he dies in like the 1930s.
Wrote historian James McPherson in his Pulitzer Prize-winning work Battle Cry of Freedom. Few men have so completely embodied the citizen-soldier ideal upon which the Union Army depended. The early summer of 1863 found the Army of the Potomac pursuing Robert E. Lee's Confederate forces northward after the Southern victory at Chancellorsville. For Chamberlain and his Maine Volunteers, the
M-A-N-I-N-E, Maine Volunteers. I mean, those kinds of things are not hard to catch.
Previous months had been difficult. Disease had ravaged their ranks more effectively than Confederate bullets, and the regiment that marched toward Pennsylvania was already weary from the grueling pace set by their commanders desperate to intercept Lee's invading force. On July 1st, 1863,
still not Chamberlain,
as the armies collided at Gettysburg.
And now he's got like 2 stars and some other weird symbol on his shoulder. That's another thing that the AI never gets right is the uniform insignia.
Gettysburg, Chamberlain's regiment remained in reserve, hearing only distant thunder of artillery. By nightfall, as reports filtered back of the day's bloody engagements, the men of the 20th Maine knew
now it's the 20th May.
Their time would soon come. In the darkness, Chamberlain received unexpected reinforcements minus 120 mutineers from the...
Minus 120? I mean, like even the script is just bad. He did get men from the 2nd Maine, which had been disbanded at that point.
2nd Maine, who had refused to serve after their enlistments expired, believing they had been unfairly transferred.
Still not Chamberlain.
Rather than ordering harsh discipline, Chamberlain spoke to the disheartened soldiers with respect and understanding. I will not order you to fight, but I ask you to come with us of your own free will, he reportedly told them. His eloquence proved persuasive. All but a handful joined the ranks of the 20th Maine, bolstering its numbers on the eve of its greatest challenge. Dawn broke on July 2nd with Chamberlain receiving critical orders from Colonel Strong Vincent.
Carmelin Vincent, it says on the screen. Colonel Strong Vincent, Carmelin Vincent.
Commander of the 3rd Brigade. The 20th Maine was to occupy and hold the far left flank of the Union line on a rocky hill called Little Round Top. You are to hold this ground at all costs, Vincent emphasized, underscoring the position's critical importance. As Chamberlain led his men up the wooded slope,
LED. Chamberlain LED his men.
Underscoring the position's critical importance. As Chamberlain led his men up the wooded slope, none could have anticipated the fury that would soon engulf them or how their actions in the next few hours would secure their place in American military legend. The professor-turned-soldier was about to face the ultimate test of leadership under fire, with consequences that would echo far beyond the blood-soaked Pennsylvania countryside. The men of the 20th Maine took position on Little Round Top just as the summer heat reached its peak on the afternoon of July 2nd. Sweat soaked their blue uniforms as they arranged themselves in a defensive line along the southern slope of the hill. From their elevated position, Chamberlain could see the panorama of battle
and that is Chamberlain when he was older,
folding across the fields below, but his attention remained fixed on his immediate responsibility, securing the extreme left flank of the entire Union Army. If his position fell, Confederate forces could roll up the Federal line from end to end, potentially winning the battle and opening the road to Washington.
That is the ultimate fear.
Hold at all hazards. Colonel Vincent's orders echoed in Chamberlain's mind as he surveyed the terrain. With remarkable tactical insight for a man without formal military education, he quickly grasped the vulnerability of his position.
See, what was brilliant about Chamberlain, though, is that he was a super intelligent guy, and it's demonstrated by the fact he didn't initially accept command of the regiment, that he understood he needed to learn first, but he learned and learned well. He studied the tactical manuals. He learned from Colonel Ames. And so he has put all that knowledge into his brain, and now he knows how to apply it on the battlefield. And so he knows his stuff. So even though he doesn't have experience as a battlefield commander in charge of a regiment until Gettysburg, he has all the knowledge necessary, and now he's going to have the chance to apply it.
The regiment formed a line stretching about 200 yards along the southern slope, but Chamberlain immediately...
I don't think the regiment held nearly that much ground. I doubt very much that their position was 200 yards. It was far less than that.
...recognized that his left flank remained exposed. Acting decisively, he extended his line by deploying Company B as skirmishers and bending Company B back at a right angle.
So he sent Company B out as skirmishers over to Big Round Top, but then it was a different part of the regiment that he bent back at an angle,
creating what military historians later termed a refused flank. According to accounts published in the Atlantic Monthly in 1880, Chamberlain had barely completed these arrangements when the first Confederate assault crashed against the Union line. The attacking force was the 15th Alabama Regiment, led by Colonel William C. Oates, seasoned veterans who had marched over 20 miles in the summer heat before being ordered to take...
Yeah, they had been marching all day that day, so, I mean, they were exhausted.
On top, the initial Confederate attack surged uphill with fearsome intensity, the air filled with the distinctive rebel yell as the Alabamians charged. Chamberlain's men held firm, delivering disciplined volleys that staggered the attackers. The professor-turned-soldier moved constantly along his line, encouraging his troops, redirecting fire, and personally steadying wavering portions of the defense. The air was thick with shot and shell, wrote Private Theodore Jerish of the 20th Maine in his...
It's weird how it has the names on the screen, but then what he says is something completely different. Like he said Theodore Jerish, but here it says Theodore Joshua.
His memoir. Men were being torn to pieces around us, but our colonel moved among us as if he were on dress parade. The Confederates withdrew, regrouped, and attacked again with renewed determination. This time, they attempted to find and turn the Union left flank, precisely the vulnerability Chamberlain had anticipated.
And that's why Chamberlain is extending his line and bending it back, because that's what you do when you're on the end of the line and you're not anchored against anybody or anything.
The fighting intensified as the afternoon wore on, with neither side gaining decisive advantage. The slopes of Little Round Top became slippery with blood as casualties mounted on both sides. 5 times the determined Confederates charged, and 5 times Chamberlain's equally determined defenders drove them back. The battle devolved into brutal close-quarters combat in places, with soldiers fighting hand-to-hand among the rocks and trees. Chamberlain himself narrowly escaped death multiple times. His boot sole was shot away, a bullet struck his scabbard, and another passed through his sleeve without drawing blood. As the battle reached its third...
Yeah, and if you go to Chamberlain's house in Brunswick, Maine, right there at Bowdoin College, you can see those boots, and you can see the spot where it was repaired from the bullet that he took at Gettysburg.
The situation for the 20th Maine grew desperate. Ammunition ran critically low, with many soldiers down to their last few cartridges. Casualties had reduced Chamberlain's effective fighting force by nearly a third. The regiment had repulsed repeated Confederate assaults, but each attack left them weaker, while the persistent Alabamians showed no signs of abandoning their objective. We had expended, on the average, more than 3/4 of our ammunition, Chamberlain later reported, and some have fired their last cartridge. The professor faced a critical decision that would test both his intellect and his courage. With ammunition nearly exhausted and another Confederate assault forming below, conventional military wisdom suggested withdrawal. But Vincent's orders had been explicit: hold at all hazards. In this crucible moment, Chamberlain's leadership would transcend mere academic theory, crystallizing into one of the most audacious battlefield decisions of the entire Civil War.
But at the same time, this was also a textbook maneuver that you would do in a situation like this, where you can't withdraw, you're running low on ammunition, you can't sit there and take another attack, you have to do something. He probably had read this somewhere. He'd probably either read it in a textbook manual, had learned it from someone, or had studied some battle of the past and had learned that this was an option. Somewhere in the memory banks that popped up in there. It's also possible, some have suggested that Ellis Spear, who was his second in command, may have also been the one who suggested it.
The sun was beginning to cast long shadows across Little Round Top when Chamberlain made his fateful decision. With ammunition nearly depleted and his men gasping for breath in the smoke-filled air, he called his company commanders together for a desperate council of war. The Confederates were regrouping for what would surely be their final, overwhelming assault. Retreat meant exposing the entire Union flank. Standing firm without ammunition meant certain defeat. Chamberlain's solution was as simple as it was audacious: fix bayonets. The order passed quickly down the line, met with grim determination by men who understood the stakes. The metallic click of bayonets locking onto rifle barrels rippled across the position. Chamberlain then outlined his unprecedented plan, not merely to stand and receive the next Confederate charge, but to countercharge down the hill in a right-wheel forward maneuver, swinging like a great door with the left of the line charging, while the right served as a hinge.
Yeah, so basically, if you just imagine it, his line looks like this. They bring the left around until it's straight, and then they all charge together.
At that moment, wrote historian Shelby Foote in his comprehensive work on the Civil War, Chamberlain transcended the conventional bounds of battlefield leadership, demonstrating the rare ability to match tactical innovation with the psychological needs of his command. The timing was perfect. As the Confederates of the 15th Alabama began their sixth assault up the slope, they were met not by desperate defensive fire, but by the shocking sight of an entire regiment charging down upon them with fixed bayonets. The unexpected countercharge caught the exhausted Southerners completely by surprise. The momentum of the downhill charge carried the Maine men forward with unstoppable force. It was the most beautiful line of battle I ever saw, recalled Lieutenant Holman Melcher, who helped lead the charge. The advancing line pivoted as planned, sweeping the slope clear of Confederate forces. Many of the surprised Alabamians surrendered on the spot, while others fled in confusion. Some fought hand-to-hand with bayonets and rifle butts in desperate personal combats among the rocks and trees. The New York Tribune later reported, "In this charge, the 20th Maine captured more than double their own number in prisoners, not counting the wounded." Chamberlain's audacious gamble had paid off spectacularly. His regiment had not only held its crucial position but had routed the opposing force and captured hundreds of prisoners. When the fighting on Little Round Top finally subsided in the gathering dusk, the 20th Maine still held the vital left flank of the Union Army. The cost had been severe. Nearly a third of Chamberlain's men were casualties, but the strategic value of their stand was incalculable.
And honestly, this is going to sound horrible to say it this way, but a third of his men, in Gettysburg terms, really not that bad compared to, the 80% suffered by the 1st Minnesota, or equal numbers suffered by the 26th North Carolina, or, the 60% losses suffered by the entire Iron Brigade as a brigade in this battle. A third is horrible if you are the 20th Maine. A third of your guys go down. That's a big, big, big deal. But when you consider how awful this entire battle was, it pales in comparison to what a lot of people faced.
As night fell over the battlefield, exhausted men collapsed where they stood. Chamberlain, despite suffering a contusion from a spent bullet and a twisted ankle, moved among his troops, organizing their position and ensuring... I don't know if
he had a twisted ankle or if it was just the bullet that hit him in the leg.
The wounded received attention. There would be no rest for the officers that night as they prepared for what the next day might bring. Word of the remarkable stand on Little Round Top spread quickly through the Union Army. Major General George Sykes,
Sykes,
commander of the 5th Corps, personally thanked Chamberlain that evening, saying, "Colonel, you have saved the day for us." General George Meade, commanding the Army of the Potomac, would later echo this sentiment in his official report. Yet for all the immediate recognition of his achievement, Chamberlain remained characteristically modest.
At that point, listen, I love Joshua Chamberlain. Great man, one of my favorite figures of the Civil War, and even his enemies, guys like John Gordon of the Confederate Army, would refer to Chamberlain as one of the knightliest soldiers of the Federal Army. But to say that he was modest might be stretching it a fair bit. Chamberlain was a master of his own propaganda, and he used a lot of this stuff to his advantage. He runs for governor of Maine multiple times, becomes the president of Bowdoin College. Later on in the 1890s, he gets the Medal of Honor for Gettysburg.
When asked about his decision to charge, he simply replied that it seemed the logical thing to do under the circumstances. This practical approach to extraordinary circumstances revealed much about the man whose academic background had somehow prepared him perfectly for the crucible of combat leadership. As the men of the 20th Maine rested fitfully amid the rocks of Little Round Top, few realized that their actions that afternoon had helped secure one of the most critical positions on a battlefield that would forever change the course of American history.
There's so many incredible photos of Joshua Chamberlain. I don't know why we have to keep using these AI-generated ones that are so clearly not him.
Dawn of July 3rd, 1863 broke over Gettysburg with an uneasy stillness. For Joshua Chamberlain and his depleted regiment, the new day brought not rest but redeployment. Though their heroic defense of Little Round Top had secured the vital position, the battle for Gettysburg was far from decided. While the 20th Maine had earned their place in history the previous afternoon, their war continued. Under orders from Corps Command, Chamberlain led his weary men to a new position near the center of the Union line along Cemetery Ridge. Their assignment reinforced the vulnerable center that General Meade correctly anticipated would become the focus of Lee's next major assault.
Time out. So I wanted to double check something because I know in the movie Gettysburg they show Chamberlain being and the 20th Maine being taken to the Union Center. and that they're right there in the midst of everything during Pickett's charge, not actually fighting, but kind of under the bombardment and everything. And that's fairly accurate. Chamberlain wrote in his report that after the fight at Little Round Top, they were moved up to the top of Big Round Top, but then around noon on July 3rd, they were moved to kind of the southern part of the left, or the southern part of the center of the Union line. They were held in reserve there in case they were needed during Pickett's charge, but they weren't in fact needed.
Though no longer holding the extreme flank, the 20th Maine's new position placed them directly in the path of what would become the most famous infantry assault of the Civil War. We had scarcely taken position when the most terrific artillery duel I had ever witnessed began, Chamberlain wrote in his report. The very air seemed torn to shreds, and the earth shook beneath the concussion of 200 guns engaged in furious combat. For nearly 2 hours, Chamberlain and his men endured the massive Confederate bombardment that preceded what would be immortalized as Pickett's charge. The regiment took shelter as best they could behind the low stone wall that ran along Cemetery Ridge.
They weren't actually at the stone wall. They were further back in reserve, which was actually more dangerous during the bombardment because most of the shells fired by the Confederates overshot their target and landed behind at places like Meade's headquarters at the Lydia Leicester House.
Still suffered casualties from the artillery barrage. Through it all, Chamberlain moved among his men, offering encouragement and embodying the calm leadership that had already become his hallmark. According to research published in the Journal of Military History, Chamberlain's leadership style, combining intellectual clarity with personal courage, proved particularly effective in sustaining morale during the psychological ordeal of enduring artillery bombardment, when soldiers could do nothing but endure the terrifying randomness of death from above. When the Confederate guns finally fell silent around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Chamberlain knew what would follow. Rising to peer over the stone wall, he watched as nearly 15,000 Confederates...
Yeah, I don't think he was near that stone wall. The stone wall was right at the center, and that was held by men from the 2nd Corps.
Confederate soldiers emerged from the tree line across the open fields, forming a magnificent battle line over a mile wide. As the gray-clad soldiers advanced across the open ground, the 20th Maine prepared to meet this new threat.
No, they didn't. They were in reserve. They were well behind the line. They were nowhere near the fighting for Pickett's charge.
Its famous charge focused primarily on a position just south of the 20th Maine's location. Portions of the Confederate assault struck the regiment's position. Once again, Chamberlain found himself directing men in desperate combat.
They were not involved. I keep saying it. They were not involved in the fight at Pickett's charge.
Although this time...
And they were actually further to the south, not north of the stone wall.
Part of a much larger...
In fact, I want to show you exactly where they were in the battlefield because I want to show you what they're getting wrong here. Okay, here's the Union Center right here, right? And let me show you where the stone wall is. It's called the Angle, and it's right here. So this is the stone wall that they're talking about. This is the center of the Union position. This was actually the target right here, the copse of trees. That's what the men of Pickett's charge, as we call it, are aiming for. They're attacking from over here. They're attacking toward that area right there. Probably the southern end of Pickett's charge is going to be right in this area here. This is about as far south as it gets, right? Down here, closer to this area here, like where the Father Corby Monument are, just north of the wheat field, my understanding is that roughly this is where the 20th Maine was. So they didn't actually move that far from Little Round Top. So they were closer to the center, but they weren't up here fighting in Pickett's charge at all.
Defensive effort rather than an isolated flank action. The men behaved magnificently, Chamberlain later noted with pride. Having proven themselves in the extreme test of the previous day, they now fought with the confidence of veterans. When the Confederate assault finally broke against the Union line and began its tragic retreat across the fields they had so courageously crossed, Chamberlain ordered his men to hold their fire against the defeated enemy. "We had seen more than enough of killing," he later wrote in his memoirs. This small act of mercy amid the carnage spoke volumes about the professor's humanity, even in war's darkest moments. By nightfall on July 3rd, it was clear that the Union Army had won a decisive victory.
I think it's kind of taking some stuff out of context there a little bit, but we'll move on.
Lee's gamble to strike into Northern territory had failed, and the Confederate Army began preparations for retreat. For Chamberlain, however, there was little time to contemplate the strategic implications of the victory. His immediate concern remained his wounded men and preparing the regiment for whatever might come next. The battle had extracted a terrible price from the 20th Maine. Of the 386 men who had marched to Little Round Top on July 2nd, 130 were now casualties, killed, wounded, or missing. Company B, which had been extended as skirmisher during the defense of Little Round Top, had suffered especially grievous losses. That night, as rain began to fall on the battlefield, washing blood into the soil of Pennsylvania. Chamberlain took a moment to write a brief letter to his wife Fanny back in Maine. "We have had a great battle," he wrote simply. "I am safe. We have won a victory, but the cost is terrible." The cost indeed proved terrible for both armies and the nation. But amid the smoke and carnage of Gettysburg, Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain had demonstrated that intellectual refinement and martial courage were not mutually exclusive. His actions on Little Round Top had helped secure a victory that would ultimately preserve the Union he had left academia to defend. In the immediate aftermath of Gettysburg, as Lee's defeated army began its painful retreat toward Virginia, Chamberlain found himself facing an enemy perhaps more dangerous than Confederate bullets: typhoid fever. The physical exhaustion of command, combined with the unsanitary conditions of camp life, had left him vulnerable to the disease that claimed so many Civil War soldiers. By July 6, he was burning with fever yet refusing evacuation, insisting on remaining with his men as they pursued Lee's retreating forces. "I will not leave my command while I have strength to stay with them," he reportedly told the regimental surgeon who urged his evacuation. This stubborn dedication nearly cost Chamberlain his life, as the fever worsened during the pursuit of Lee's army through Maryland. According to accounts from the Maine Historical Society Quarterly, Chamberlain finally collapsed during a march near Middletown, Maryland. His condition became so grave that field surgeons warned he might not survive. Reluctantly, he accepted medical evacuation to Washington, where he spent several weeks recovering in a military hospital while his regiment continued the campaign without him. During this period of enforced convalescence, news of Chamberlain's remarkable leadership at Little Round Top began to spread beyond military circles. Northern newspapers, hungry for heroes in a war that had often provided few causes for celebration, seized upon the story of the professor who had saved the Union left flank with a bayonet charge. The New York Tribune published a detailed account of the action, describing Chamberlain as a scholar transformed by patriotism into a warrior of remarkable skill and courage. While Chamberlain recovered in Washington, official recognition of his achievement at Gettysburg took formal shape. On August 11,
made a brigade
1863, General George Meade personally wrote a commendation that would later accompany Chamberlain's promotion to brigadier general. For daring heroism and great tenacity in holding his position on the left of the line and carrying his brigade against superior numbers, capturing
his regiment. He's made a brigade commander in August of 1863, but he's not promoted to brigadier general. The brigadier general promotion will come when he's supposedly on his deathbed at Petersburg.
Over 400 prisoners. By September, though still not fully recovered, Chamberlain insisted on returning to field command, rejoining the Army of the Potomac as it maneuvered against Lee's forces in Virginia. His reputation now preceded him, and both officers and enlisted men regarded the scholar soldier with newfound respect. Yet those who served under him noted that fame had not changed his essential character. He remained the thoughtful, humane commander who balanced military necessity with compassion for his men. The fall campaign of 1863 saw Chamberlain leading his regiment through a series of engagements.
He was a brigade commander by that point. We're talking about like Mine Run and things like that.
In Virginia, including actions at Rappahannock Station and Mine Run. Though these operations lacked the dramatic intensity of Gettysburg, they further demonstrated Chamberlain's growing tactical proficiency and leadership skills. In December 1863, recognizing both his Gettysburg heroism and subsequent service, the War Department issued Chamberlain's promotion to brigadier general. The former professor had risen from lieutenant.
All right, we're going to stop right there because I want to take a look at these facts here and get it right for you. So here's what Grant says in his memoirs about the Battle for Petersburg in the summer of 1864. He says, Colonel J.L. Chamberlain of the 20th Maine was wounded on the 18th. He was gallantly leading his brigade at the time, as he had been in the habit of doing in all engagements in which he had been engaged. He had been several times recommended for brigadier general for gallant and meritorious conduct. On this occasion, however, I promoted him on the spot and forwarded a copy of my order to the War Department. And I've looked at a number of other examples of this, and basically he's promoted to brigade command in August of 1864, but then he's ill after that, and during the Mine Run campaign, if you look at the order of battle, you won't see Chamberlain's name anywhere, either in command of a brigade or in command of the regiment. Major Ellis Spears in command of the 20th Maine, because Chamberlain was ill at that time, but he was given brigade command, but his first real combat as a brigade commander is going to come the next year during the Overland campaign. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up right there. I think we've seen enough. I've made my point. I'm not going to subject us to the rest of this video. But if you have other like AI type videos like this that you'd like me to do a review of, not necessarily to promote the video. And like I said, I didn't even give you the link to this video because I don't want to be promoting a channel. I don't mind the use of AI if it's done well and it's done in a way to enhance and accurately portray history. But if it's being used like this, that's just sloppy and lazy, then I've got a big problem with it. So I hope you understand why I did this, and I hope you'll just be cautious of whatever content you see. And even people who are presenting history in real life, be careful, because a lot of channels out there, including some really popular history channels, often get the history wrong. And you know what? I sometimes do too, and I'll try to correct myself whenever I do that. It's never intentional, but we need to be careful. Thanks for watching.